Hello and welcome. This is Lisa Jones, and you are listening to the Exploring Death podcast. Hello and welcome to the Exploring Death podcast. I'm Lisa Jones, your host, and today I have with me Gabrielle Elise Jimenez. In her 40s, Gabrielle went back to school to become a hospice nurse. It was not an easy journey, as she shares that in her book called Soft Landing. Becoming a hospice nurse was the change she needed to see in her world. She introduces you to some of the wonderful people she cared for until they passed and the lessons that she learned about life through death. Welcome, Gabrielle.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you here, and I wanted to just share that we met during the Afterlife Conference in Salt Lake City.
Yes.
And I'm thrilled to talk about your experience of how you decided to become a hospice nurse, and also then your experiences of actually being one. So let's step back and first talk about what drew you to wanting to become a hospice nurse.
Well, when you look back, you realize that there were all these different things that sort of led you there, but you didn't see them along the way. I managed commercial real estate for a long time. That was my thing. That's what I did. I felt like I was good at it. And then I got laid off, and I started to take care of my friend's husband, who was dying of prostate cancer. And there was something amazing about being at his bedside and helping him and making things a little easier. And I watched as the hospice people came in and took care of him. And I thought, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. So I went to school and I became a CNA and then a home health aide. And then I realized that I wanted to do more. And so I went back to school to be a nurse, and was so hard. And there were a lot of obstacles, and there were a lot of things that kept trying to get in my way. And I think that almost inspired me. There were so many times I wanted to quit, but I just kept doing it, and it wasn't going to beat me down. And I became a nurse and immediately into hospice, and it's hard. It's super hard, but it is the most beautiful thing I've ever done, besides having children.
Wow. I love that. I guess I'm curious, do you have a story or two about what was so difficult in nursing school? I mean, what was one of your breaking points?
The age of everyone else in there. They're in their 20s. Their parents are paying for their school, most of them. They don't have to work. I was working a full-time job and trying to pay rent and all of my life expenses and go to school. And I was 40-something. I hadn't been to school in a really long time. And some of them were a little bit bratty. They needed a spanking and a timeout. And and they would ignore me sometimes when I would speak my mind about their behavior. And so they would ignore me. So I'd walk in the room and none of them would talk to me. It was horrible. So that was a big obstacle. I also found out that I was dyslexic during the process, and which explained why I wasn't able to retain a lot of information and why I couldn't remember things and why my test taking was so difficult. So that was a big struggle. And so through the nursing school process, I learned how to study, and I learned how to take tests, and I failed towards the end. I failed psych, and I had to go back and do the last module again. Now, the benefit of that was that I had taken some of the stuff I had learned the first time and brought it with me. So I was kind of smart, and I got to tutor people because I was doing it twice. But it ended up, I graduated with honors, and dyslexia wasn't a challenge anymore. So.
Wow. Those are some big circumstances to overcome. And I mean, that must have been just a real victory for you to end up graduating with honors after all of that struggle.
I was very proud.
Congratulations. That's amazing. And so I guess then immediately you chose to go into hospice, which of course you already kind of had that in your mind before you went to nursing school. So what has been your experience since you've been there?
So people always say, oh my gosh, how do you do that job? All you ever see is death, which is true. I am surrounded by death 24/7. But what I see is life. I see how precious and fragile life is. I see how beautiful love is on so many different levels. And spiritual faith and religion, when someone has a faith so strong that they hold on to it, it inspires me. And I see people praying at the bedside, and rosaries wrapped around fingers, and crosses, and Bibles and prayers of all different types from all different people of all different countries. And it's inspiring, and it's beautiful. And I'm reminded every day how lovely it is to be alive. But I do see death. I see a lot of it. I've either cared for or seen several hundred people pass. And death is not predictable. You can't say it's going to happen like this. So one of the things that you learn in the process is how different every human is, and how different every experience is, and how powerful and strong you are, to be able to be there for them. And it feeds my soul. It's hard and it's beautiful all at the same time.
Wow, I love that. I feel very much the same way. I'm a hospice volunteer, so I go and sit
Of
at
course,
the
you are. Those are my
bedside.
favorite people. I love our volunteers.
I've got chills as you say that. And truly, it is, like you said, next to childbirth, the best thing that I've ever done. And especially sitting vigil with the people that are within 24 to 48 hours, or, to our guests that are going to be passing, and just the amazing energy and connection I feel with them. Generally, the family is not with them, and that's why we have vigil, because if they had family, they wouldn't necessarily need the volunteers sitting there. But there's just something, it's like you said, it's difficult, and yet it's one of the most amazing experiences. And I liken it to childbirth. I mean, because you're sitting in a room waiting, but it's, instead of them coming in, they're leaving. And so I feel like we're just preparing them to go on to the next event, whatever that might be. And I'm sure you have some stories maybe about that you've seen or experienced in taking care of.
Boy, so many stories. And as I've said, death isn't predictable, right? So you don't know how they're going to be. And I think one of the things that I find the most, I don't know if it's reward or struggle, but is when I walk into a room and I know that that person's about to take their last breath. And I know I have just moments to let that family be present. I have to gather them around. And sometimes it's one or two people. Sometimes it's the wife of 70 years who has to say goodbye to her husband, or the mother of a son, or the father, or the sister, the brother, however the connection is, to rally them at that bedside at that moment, and to say, this is your chance. Give them permission. Tell them goodbye. Tell them thank you. And sometimes if I feel like I have a little bit more time, I have this favorite quote. It says, my memories say hello. They'd ask about you all the time. I love that. And I tell that to my families just before they're saying goodbye. I say, share a memory. Tell them something that makes you feel happy inside. Thank them for that. Give them a memory. And so what I practice most of all at the bedside is that while that person is still breathing, they're still alive, and they hear everything. That moment has to matter. That moment is when you give them everything, because they deserve it and they matter. And if I do it in such a way that they both receive it, the grief is less. The pain is a little gentler, and the landing is softer, and it's kinder. And so I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make that moment matter.
Wow, beautiful. It brings tears to my eyes to think, I mean, what a beautiful gift that you're giving, not only the person that's passing, but the family that I think is really, that's the people that struggle, right? The people that are left behind. I lost my husband when I was 37. And, as he left, I was so happy for him, as I had an out-of-body experience and went to heaven and saw him being welcomed and all of that. And so I was thrilled for him, but I was so sad for me to lose that physical presence in my life and the father of my two children. And so I think what you're doing for people, giving them that opportunity to, I love that idea of sharing a memory with them when they're still still breathing. And even in my experience, even after they've taken in a breath or, they're still there with us. It's just a matter
Absolutely.
of, but I think for them to know that they're still alive is so helpful for the family. So
And that
that's
they can
cool.
hear everything. I think people have a
Yes.
misconception that you're supposed to sit at the bedside in total silence and just be very quiet. And maybe sometimes that there is that person that does want that. But what if they want to leave hearing Pink Floyd? Let them hear Pink Floyd, or if they want Mexican dancers running around. I mean, anything that gives them some semblance of life, don't whisper, they hear you. Don't sit on the
Right.
phone and turn your back. Don't make it quiet and somber. Open the room up, give it life. Let them have music, let them have laughter, let them hear you laugh, because that's a gift. And I think we forget that as humans. We think that it's supposed to be a different way, but it doesn't have to be that way.
And that's right. That's right. Well, do you have a specific story or two? I'd love to hear a couple that you've had.
Well, I have one that's just recent, and it's there's this woman, and she had been married for 60 years, and she's very hard of hearing. And it was just her and I at the bedside. And I knew he was dying. I knew it was soon. And she kept making phone calls to all of his friends on the phone, on the speaker phone, and its volume is turned up loud. And she probably made 5 phone calls while he's laying there. And she's playing out his experience. And she's talking to the person. Yes, he's going to die. And then we're going to go to this funeral home. And then we're going to do this. And I thought, number one, I don't think that's what he wants to hear. And number two, I don't think that's the last thing she wants to say to him. So I said, hey, let's go for a little walk for a second. And she said, oh, okay. So I took her outside and I said, this is his experience. And we have to be mindful of that, right? We have to think, what would he want? And I think what he'd really want is to just hear you and to know that you're there and that you're present and that how you feel. He wants to say goodbye to you. He doesn't want to hear his funeral plans. You only have a short time left. And she goes, oh, I didn't think about that. And so we go back in the room. She sits down on his side. I sit on the other. And she says, honey, I'm so sorry I was such a jackass. And she starts laughing. And she goes, that was really selfish of me. And I'm looking at her, go, no, don't. And she goes, no, that was really selfish of me. She goes, honey, I love you and I'm going to miss you. And she started talking to him. And of course, I'm crying and she's crying. And he took his last breaths, but he took it knowing that she was there, fully, completely present. And who am I to tell someone else how to talk to the one that they love, right? Part of me wants to say, just keep your mouth shut and let this be about their experience. But sometimes people need to be reminded that it's not about us, that it's about that person that's laying in that bed. And his death was beautiful. And she said all the right things. And those were the last words he heard.
Beautiful. Wow. It'd be so nice, right, if everybody could have that experience, because I know for a lot of people it's not that way. And it's very traumatic and especially, I mean, hospice, at least it's not a shock generally. I mean, it's kind of like people are in hospice knowing that the end is near, but it's those sudden tragic losses that I think are sometimes very difficult, how to deal with that. I know you're a hospice nurse, but what are your thoughts about maybe car accidents or people that are killed
So I
suddenly?
don't deal with that very often. But I will tell you that no matter how prepared you are, you could have been sitting at the bedside for weeks or months or longer, an illness that's been going on for years. When that last breath is taken, it's as though they had no idea it was going to happen. So you can be prepared, but you can be in shock at the same time. And, I think there was one person, and I mean, gosh, I've had so many patients. There was a one time when there were 2 sisters and they had not talked for years. And she was called to the bedside of her sister because her illness had taken a quick turn. So she flew in, I don't remember from where, but I remember it was a very long flight. And she got there, she got to the bedside, and this patient only had a couple hours left. And she just looked at me and she said, well, what do I say? What do I do? And I said, you could forgive, you could apologize, you could say the things that you wish you've said all these years. but she had 2 hours to go over the last 15 years that they didn't talk. And she just looked at her sister and she said, "I'm so sorry. And I wish I had more time." And I think that's the thing that I've learned most in this job, is that not to wait for the bedside to say you're sorry, not to wait for the bedside to forgive or apologize or go over things that should have just been put aside. Do that stuff now. Get it over now, so that when you're at that bedside, you can just say, "I love you, and I'm going to really miss you terribly." And she did do that, but it was hard because she had a lot of guilt. A lot of people have guilt, and you have to let that go. And it's not easy.
Right. And I think your message is so perfect. And for anyone listening to this podcast right now that has someone in their life that they are, not talking to or have had a disagreement with, I mean, if you have any desire, and sometimes there is, there are some good reasons not to reconnect with somebody if they've been abusive or whatever, right? But if it's just really about stuff that's not so meaningful,
Let it go.
let it go, right? Time is short, and like you said, it's way better to mend those fences and to have that relationship clear before you get to the bedside, or God forbid somebody is killed instantly in a car accident or something, and then you need to get that opportunity to clear that up with yourself.
Well, and all we can really count on is right this minute. This is all we're absolutely certain of. So if that was the only moment you were going to have, wouldn't you want it to be a little more enjoyable, a little kinder? So I sort of live this life of moments matter. Right now matters. I love my family. I love my friends. I love my job. And every single day I want to make a memory. I want somebody in my life to know how much they matter to me. And I want to tell somebody in my life every single day, thank you, because I may not get that chance. And I'm not going to wait till tomorrow for something wonderful to happen when it can happen today. And I think that's what we learn in hospice.
That's great. I just heard this recently, that life is urgent.
Isn't that the truth?
It is so true. And yet people, it seems like they're just kind of, wasting life. Or I hear people say all the time, "Oh, I'm just killing time." I'm like, don't say killing time.
No.
I mean, there are so many opportunities that you could be doing in your life right now rather than killing time. So
Yes. And
I love that.
we'll do that next week. What if you can't? Do it now.
That's right. That's right. That is beautiful. Oh my goodness. So any other particular story that comes to mind?
Well, since you're a volunteer, I want to share a story with you. And I'm probably going to cry.
Okay.
So in my book, I write a lot about the team that doesn't get as much notoriety, I guess, as they should. It's the caregivers and the volunteers. The caregivers are up close and personal. They are so right there with that patient, and they deserve so much gratitude and thanks and love and support because their job is hard. The volunteers, they hold just this amazing space in my heart because they're unselfish and they're kind and they're giving simply to give. And they blow my mind every single day. So it was Christmas Day, and I had 3 patients to see. And I arrived at this one patient. He was in a facility, so it was a small board and care, so there were staff there, but he was in his room and he was struggling for breath. And I went in and I asked them, I said, "How long had he been sitting there like this?" "Oh, well, he's been breathing like that all night." And I said, "But he's suffering. Why didn't you call us?" "Oh, well, we were asleep. We sleep at night." Okay. So I went and I talked to the doctor and I got an order for some medication, and I sat at his bedside and I held his hand and I talked to him and I put my hand over his chest and I said, "I'm right here. I've got you." And I knew that he was going to die, and I didn't know how soon, hours, maybe tomorrow, but it was Christmas Day and I had 2 other patients to see. So I called our volunteer coordinator and I said, "I know I know this is really short notice and it's Christmas Day, but is there any way you can get somebody to come and sit vigil for this man? I don't want him to die alone. And they said, we'll see what we can do. And like 6 volunteers volunteered, and he wasn't alone, and he didn't die alone because someone sat at his bedside every minute until he took his last breath. And it was beautiful, and it was unselfish, and it was kind. And it's my favorite story because it truly is a story of everything that you volunteers do. So thank you.
Oh, wow. That is gorgeous. And it's so true. I think for me, especially here on Maui, Hawaii, there are so many people that don't have family here. So it's such an honor and a privilege to sit with these patients who have no family. And I just know how much it would mean to me.
It's a gift. It's an unselfish, really kind gift.
Right. If my family member didn't have somebody with them, and I feel like for every person I sit with, I just would hope that there's somebody out there that would sit with my family.
There is. Someone like you and like me.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Here we are, both.
I'm sorry.
Crying away. No, don't be sorry. Tears of happiness and love. I mean, truly, that's what it is. It's pure love. And that's what I feel when I sit with my patients, is just that unconditional human love for another human being that you don't want to be suffering.
I love my job. I love it with every ounce of my being.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you is, I feel as though a lot of people have misconceptions about hospice. And I mean, I've heard it over and over again. It's like, oh, well, that's where you go to die. And I just would like, for the record, to say that, yes, it is the end of care life, but it's not, I don't know. I mean, I guess it is where you go to die, but it's so not that when you're in it. And I wished that my husband was like, no hospice, no hospice. They literally came the day, they came on Saturday and he died at 2:00 a.m. the next morning, Sunday morning. So I didn't get any support. I mean, it would be wonderful to have the volunteers and the hospice support that I've seen now, here in Maui, what people get. It's phenomenal. And so for anybody that has a patient that, could apply for hospice, I highly recommend it, because it's just such a beautiful team of people that come in. What are your thoughts about that?
I have a lot of them. So I whenever someone says, what is hospice? And I say, well, it's not a diagnosis. It's a plan of care. It is a benefit that your insurance provides, right? And so what you get is you get in-home nursing and doctors and support staff. You get supplies. You get a hospital bed. I mean, it's really wonderful to be able to have this support, because first of all, it's hard to die, but even harder is to be with someone who's dying, especially someone you love, and to take on all that responsibility yourself. So if you're given a diagnosis and it's 6 months or less to live, go on hospice. Let this amazing team, you've got a doctor, you've got a nurse, you've got a spiritual support, you've got social work, you've got home health aides who will come and bathe them. You've got people, volunteers, who will come and sit with your loved one. We'll make sure that you have the supplies and tools you need. We will support you. It's not just about the patient, it's about the people who love him. And it's a plan of care. It's a really wonderful team of really wonderful people who help you get through what will be the hardest time of your life. Hospice has a dark cloud, and I'm constantly trying to remove it. It's a kinder way to die, and you won't do it alone.
That's beautiful. I love that. PSA, I think that should go out there to everybody, public service announcement about what hospice is, a plan of care.
A plan of care.
That is a beautiful way of saying it, because so many people, I mean, and in fact, one of my nurses that I work with, she's like, yeah, my mother-in-law says I go to work to kill people. I'm like, oh my God, that is so not true. I mean, and the other thing is that I've learned that people graduate from hospice, which does not mean they die. They actually get better and they go home, and things happen because of this miraculous team that comes in and helps them get their situation under control and so that they don't need to be on hospice any longer.
It does happen.
So, that's another possibility.
And you don't have to stay on it forever. It's not a requirement. Oh, once you're on, you can't get off. Well, no, that's not it at all. It's this idea of helping you through the process. And if you thrive, if you are able to rally somehow, then that's a blessing. We support that. Hope is my favorite word. I encourage that. If that's the possibility, then let's get you off hospice. But let's get you through this first. And if you can do that, oh my goodness, that's wonderful. And if you need us later, then come back. But we don't tie you to the bedside and say, this is it, you're gone. Instead, we say, what can we do to help you?
That's right. Oh my gosh, beautifully said. Well, on that note, let me pull some cards and do a little reading about hospice and, the whole idea of what hospice does to help people. So, because again, this is one of my most favorite experiences of life. So the first card is always the blockage card. And so the card that I pulled is simplicity. And what I'm getting is that what happens when people first think about hospice is not simplicity. I mean, things are so complicated, right? You have a diagnosis, you get a 6-month or less prognosis. And so people are just freaking out. They don't know what to do. And so the last thing on their mind is simplicity. But to me, that's exactly what is needed in that time of chaos and overwhelm is simplicity. And that is what hospice to me provides for the family. And so the action card is faith, to trust that by calling hospice in and really bringing the team forward, that it will help you and not, it'll be just trust and knowing that, because I think it's scary. I think for so many people, when even if they do get that diagnosis or even think about hospice, it's like, it's the end, right? And everybody's like, no, 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 no. They're like putting their hands up and like, no. But rather than doing that, having faith that this will help, ease the process and help, as you said, during one of the most difficult times in your life. And the outcome is delight, which I love that, because truly from everyone I've spoken to, the families and the nurses and just the whole experience of hospice has been delightful. I mean, people, they're just so grateful for me being the volunteer, and I see the nurses, everybody's so happy when the nurses come and the doctors, and it's just a beautiful community of people that come together. And it really is, as a dark of a time as it is, it's such a beautiful, filled with light, delight, a delightful time to be together and come together as community. I think that's another big part of hospice, is that it's really a beautiful way for community to come and support one another.
Absolutely. We don't do it alone.
That's right.
It takes a village.
That is correct. That is correct. So I love that reading. I think it's wonderful, and for anybody that might be, in the situation of potentially needing hospice or even down the road, just have that as part of your plan. Have that written down somewhere, that you would like hospice to be involved in when and if that opportunity arises for you in your care plan.
To let them in, to embrace it, because the landing will be softer.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, speaking of that, tell me a little bit about your book.
Okay. Well, I just happen to have it right here.
Beautiful.
It's 45 pages. It starts out, it talks about how I became a nurse and all my obstacles. I share some wonderful patient stories, some lessons I learned about life through death. And it was my therapy it took me 2 years to write, because it kept evolving and I kept changing it and adding to it. And it's beautiful and I love it. And it's got 27 5-star reviews on Amazon. And it's nice. And I've kind of carried over. I'm working on a second book right now, but I also started a blog. It's called thehospiceheart.net. And I kind of carry on, because what I realized while I was writing this book was that was my therapy. And once it was published, all of a sudden I didn't have an outlet. So now I write this blog and I just share stories or help other hospice nurses or give advice to someone who might be at the bedside caring for someone. And it's become my therapy and it feels good.
Wow, that's beautiful. And the name of the book is Soft Landing, and you can
Soft
find it on
landing.
Amazon.
Yes.
Wonderful. And if anybody wants to reach out to you, is there an email or they can contact you through your blog? What's the best way for them
They
to get?
well, I would say contact me through my blog. It's probably
Wonderful.
the easiest. And it's www.thehospiceheart.net.
Wonderful. And we will certainly have those links down below in the show notes so
Okay.
people can click there. And well, Gab, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I
Thank
think this
you.
was such an important, really a public service announcement about hospice and the benefits and the beauty of the whole experience.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you. And thank you for what you do. Truly.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Exploring Death podcast. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Before you make any financial or legal decisions, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Exploring Death. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.